discussing Wilson's domestic policies in particular. Now we're going to back up and talk about foreign policy during the progressive years. Wilson, by the way, is going to be the last progressive president. There were only three: Roosevelt, Taft, and Wilson. So, if we're going to talk about progressive foreign policy, we have to go back to the first progressive president, which was Roosevelt. In 1904, the Japanese got into a really big war with Russia. The Russo-Japanese War, it was called. Japan had for decades been working really hard at getting a modern navy and a modern military, but particularly navy. And first, a few years before this, they had actually defeated China with their modern navy, something they've been trying to do really for centuries. Now they face a European foe, a large-scale European power, Russia, which Russia you could really describe as Eurasian. Nonetheless, they're thought of as European at the time. And the Japanese had the upper hand. The Japanese really won the war and defeated the Russians, which was huge because this was a, quote, colored race, defeating a major European power. However, just because it was clear that Japan had the upper hand wasn't the end of things. Treaty negotiations had to be settled, and none other than President Teddy Roosevelt of the United States stepped forward, volunteering to be the arbiter between Russia and Japan. As you can see, here's a photograph, actual photograph on the left with Roosevelt in the middle, and then there's a cartoon there showing him being the arbiter between this very, very beaten down Russian and Japanese person. What's significant about this? This is the United States stepping out onto the world stage in this major confrontation between major powers, and the American president being the person who steps in the middle and presents, seals the deal. So that's pretty significant. Here, I'm not sure how well you can see this map, but there are several different areas in the Western Hemisphere during from 1895 to the 1930s, where the United States got involved militarily. That is a big story of the progressive era. The United States exerting its military will, really, on Central and South America and the Caribbean. We already know that in the late 1890s there was that war with Spain that eventually led to the United States taking over Cuba and Puerto Rico over here. But there were a lot more. You can see there were a couple of different things in Haiti. 1915, U.S. takes control over customs collections, and then the U.S. occupies Haiti from 1915 to 1934. With the Dominican Republic, same thing. They occupied from 1916 to 1924. Purchased the Virgin Islands. The U.S. is involved in a boundary dispute between Venezuela and British Guyana. Some things going on in Panama that we will discuss in more detail. Nicaragua, U.S. control, U.S. occupation, 1909, 1910, 1912, 1928, into the 30s. Several things in Mexico that we'll talk about. So basically, all throughout Latin America, the U.S. military was getting involved. Later on, we'll talk about a very popular humorist or a comedian of the time period, Will Rogers, who was known for his political commentary, his political jokes. He said once, I just saw the most amazing thing when I was taking a walk. I saw a United States Marine in the United States. The joke being that our Marines are constantly being deployed all around through here. So now we'll take a closer look at what happened in Panama. In 1914, the Panama Canal is opened. Panama Canal, extremely significant. Before that canal was built at the narrowest area there between the Atlantic and Pacific Ocean, if you were on the East Coast and you wanted to travel by sea to San Francisco, you would have to go all the way down to the bottom of South America to Tierra del Fuego, then come all the way back up. A very long journey. If you were the President of the United States, and you were particularly concerned about naval power, as President Roosevelt was, then you are going to have two navies, right? You're going to have a navy in the Pacific and have a navy in the Atlantic. If something comes up on either side, then you need to reinforce your navy. Something happens in the Pacific and you want these Atlantic ships to get there, they have to make this long trip. Therefore, it was not only a matter of convenience for travel or for trade, but also a defense question, really, as far as having this canal in place. But there's a problem. The problem was that the people of Panama did not want, or the people of Colombia, which Panama was at that point a part of Colombia, did not want the United States to have access to such a canal and to build such a canal, didn't give them permission to do it. This was in the early planning stages of the canal, more than a decade before it finally opened, 1903. The United States of America actually sent warships down into this area and lent support to a rebellion of the people of Panama against Colombia, which controlled Panama, to get their independence. Well, on the one hand, that fits into the overall narrative of the U.S. going and liberating people, but in reality, they were liberating Panama in such a way that it was going to benefit the U.S. because the new leaders of Panama said after the U.S. Navy came and helped them secure their independence, why, sure, why don't you come build a canal right through here? All this was part of Teddy Roosevelt's approach to foreign relations in the Western Hemisphere. A famous quote of his that he had said he had heard from, I believe, an African tribesman or something, was, "Speak softly and carry a big stick." So, you don't come across as being bombastic. You don't come across as being threatening. You don't yell at people and threaten people. You speak very softly and diplomatically. But they know you're holding that big stick and the threat is there. The threat that if they don't cooperate with you, you're going to whomp them with that stick. So here's a cartoon called The Big Stick in the Caribbean Sea. And here is Teddy playing with his toy boats, right? Basically patrolling and controlling the Caribbean Sea. Perhaps you've heard of the Monroe Doctrine. This is something from a century previous. President Monroe, the fifth president in the 1820s, had said to the world at large, to European powers, European colonial powers in particular, you're not going to be allowed to colonize and get involved with the workings of the new nations in Central America. A lot of new nations were being formed. They had thrown off the control of the Spanish. He had said, basically, President Monroe, that the United States is not going to allow Europeans in here. President Roosevelt's approach, taken, 90 years later, came to be called the Roosevelt Corollary. That is, a corollary is something that's attached to something else. So this is sort of a corollary to the Monroe Doctrine. Roosevelt's corollary was, you Europeans aren't going to be allowed to do this, but we will. The United States is going to make sure everything runs smoothly, even if it means getting directly involved